You get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something good happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak.
Stop talking.
My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
And it's about standards and public life. No, I'll tell you what's hypocrisy, Narinda.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin.
We believe in the UK.
No bias, no censorship.
It just doesn't make sense to me. He wasn't doing his job as Chancellor.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton Tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
Hello and welcome. This is Real Britain with Calvin Robinson on TV, radio and online. Today, as the UK net migration hits an all-time record at 504,000, Rishi Sunak is considering making it more difficult for international students to bring their families to the UK. Has the government missed the boat on handling migration? Plus, we'll be talking about strikes and more strikes, and are traditional fairy tales too dark for children? All of that coming up, but first, let's get your latest news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Thank you, Calvin. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 2. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. An independent review into the London Fire Brigade has found the service to be institutionally misogynist and racist. Our national reporter, Theo Chikomba, is outside the LFB's headquarters for us. And Theo, what can you tell us about this new report?
Yes, that's right. This report took 10 months, led by Nazir Afzal and his team, looking into the culture here at the London Fire Brigade. And the Commissioner, Andy Rowe, has said this since he heard about this report. He said the London Fire Brigade is horrified to hear about this. It's a damning report into the brigade, saying, I think there'll be many staff, decently dedicated public servants, that will be equally horrified and heartbroken as well. The report looks into different instances, people saying they were bullied, they were one female firefighter saying she received a video of a colleague sending her inappropriate videos and more. But of course, it's a reflection of what's happening in the culture here, and there'll be zero tolerance according to the Commissioner as well.
Thank you very much. That was Theo Chikomba, our national reporter outside the LFB's headquarters for us. Now, at least 13 people are missing after a landslide in Italy. A number of people are feared to have been killed in the incident on the holiday island of Ischia, which has been hit by heavy rain in recent days. However, Italy's Interior Minister says the deaths haven't been confirmed. Emergency services say they're continuing the search and rescue operation as buildings have been engulfed by the landslide. Train cleaners have voted to strike over pay in what would be the biggest strike ever in the industry. The rail, maritime and transport unions say more than 1,000 of its members, working for several private contractors, backed the industrial action. It says rail strikes by train drivers continue today, with more travel disruption expected. Members of ASLEF across 11 train operators are walking out in a dispute over pay, meaning a significantly reduced service. The death of a man at the Manchester Migrant Processing Centre may have been caused by a bacterial infection. That's according to the Home Office. An investigation is currently underway and the coroner hasn't made a final conclusion on the cause of his death. It's believed the man arrived in the UK on a small boat just a week before he died. The government say they're offering vaccinations for the infection at the Manston Centre. Ukraine's President Zelensky has hosted a food security summit with the Prime Ministers of Belgium, Poland and Lithuania and the President of Hungary today. The United Nations is calling for humanitarian aid for people in Ukraine who have been left without power following Russian attacks. It's after President Zelensky says 6 million people are without electricity after the series of rocket attacks earlier on this week. The mayor of Ukraine, Vitaly Klitschko, says about 70% of households in Kyiv still have no power. Meanwhile, British military intelligence says Russia is removing nuclear warheads from old cruise missiles before using them for attacks in Ukraine. The MOD says the move highlights Moscow's low stock of long-range missiles. England manager Gareth Southgate played down boos by disappointed fans following the Lions' draw with the USA in the World Cup last night. It means the team missed out on a chance to guarantee a place in the last 16. Supporters at a fan zone in South London were furious by the result, throwing cups and spraying drinks. England will face Wales next, with the latter needing a victory to keep up their chances of making the knockout stages. Well, former England manager Sam Allardyce says he's still hopeful England can win the tournament.
There's enough experience in the backroom staff, the manager, there's enough experience in the squad now, having gone through 2 tournaments, that they've got the tools to win this competition. But Gareth needs to use the squad to its full potential, and that means, for me, quite a few changes for the next game.
And yellow weather warnings are now in place for large parts of the UK. A warning by the Met Office for rain and strong winds will be affecting southern England, Wales and Scotland. The warnings in Wales and England will stay in place until 3 a.m. tomorrow morning. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Real Britain with Calvin Robinson.
Welcome to Real Britain. Here's what's coming up on the show. The Office for National Statistics estimates that the UK net migration has hit 504,000, the highest figure ever recorded. Home Secretary Suella Braverman says the figures are understandable given the circumstances in Ukraine, Afghanistan and Hong Kong, and considering the generosity of the British people. But the Prime Minister is now reportedly considering making it harder for international students to bring their families to the UK. But will this help curb the problem? Meanwhile, it's strikes, strikes, strikes and more strikes. The latest announcement of further industrial action comes from the teaching union, the Educational Institute of Scotland. They join the ever-growing list of unions striking this winter, with the Royal Mail, nurses and rail unions among them. And are fairy tales too dark for kids? In a poll, almost half of parents say Hansel and Gretel is inappropriate, with 90% of people surveyed saying they perpetuate gender stereotypes. Do these classics need updating, or do these parents need to grow up? That's what we're talking about for the next hour. I'd love to know your thoughts. Tweet me at GBNews, or you can email me on gbviews@gbnews.uk, and you can watch us online too on YouTube. Here we go. It was revealed this week that net migration soared to a record high of 504,000 in the year to June, a figure equivalent to the population of Liverpool. Downing Street says the increase is down to the arrival of hundreds of thousands of refugees from Afghanistan, Hong Kong and Ukraine, as well as post-pandemic travel, with an increase in foreign student numbers. However, the high numbers will nevertheless alarm government ministers, with levels far above those seen before the 2016 EU referendum, and come at a time when Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer is beginning to talk tougher on immigration. To discuss this, I am joined by international security and border control expert Henry Bolton and political commentator Matthew Stadlen. Henry, I'll start with you if you don't mind. Thank you very much for joining us this Saturday. Henry, What do you make of these record high figures? Surely they are entirely unsustainable.
They're shocking, Calvin. I think we all expected the figures to be higher than before, but these figures are absolutely shocking. And you ask whether they're sustainable. Of course, they're not. What we've got now is in the last roughly one person in every 133 in these islands arrived in the 12 months up to June. That's a huge number. And of course, people say, well, they all contribute towards services and so on through paying taxes. Well, a lot of them aren't paying tax, but even if they are, then that money is not being translated into public services. We're seeing cuts in local government. We're not seeing big investment in policing. I mean, yes, they're recruiting more police officers, but they're not opening the 600 police stations that were closed and so on. And there's a housing issue. So the answer to your question, is it sustainable? The answer is quite simply no. But then, we have to also be a little bit fair on this. I always like to be sort of as fair as I can. The present government, the present ministers, present Prime Minister, aren't themselves directly responsible for the policies that have led to this. For example, Ukraine, Afghanistan, and Hong Kong related policies. Those were sort of previous prime ministers, previous ministers who brought about those policies. And we are seeing that feed through into the overall immigration numbers. But at the same time, the fact of the matter is that the government doesn't really have control. If the government wanted to say, let's reduce these numbers, then there is a whole raft of different procedures and processes and training issues that they've got to address, plus institutional culture within the civil service, before actually the system will respond positively to the direction of ministers. And my fear, and it's a real fear, and it's based on knowledge of the system, knowledge of many of the people involved, is that quite simply, that's not going to happen. Ministers don't know how to drive that change. They know what they want to achieve, but they have no skills or experience. They don't have the toolkit, if you like, to drive that change through the civil service. And that's their problem.
Absolutely. OK, Matthew, what do you think? Should we be worried about these sky-high net migration figures?
I think there's so much to unpack here. I won't be able to fit all of it into this first answer, Calvin. But I'd say first of all this, that the pictures that we've just been watching there, I think are somewhat misleading because there are people coming here on small boats, on rubber dinghies. Now, these people have been described as invaders. It's an invasion, according to Suella Braverman. What's fascinating about these figures is the actual number of people coming to this country is more like 1.1 million people. That is a huge number on any analysis. Of those 1.1 million people who came here in the year to June, only under 80,000 of those applied for asylum. And that includes people who tried to get here on small boats. So that offers some sort of perspective. We're constantly, to use a phrase used by others, being flooded by these sorts of pictures. But actually, the vast majority of people who emigrated to this country over the past year were not seeking asylum. A lot of those people were coming on deals, as Henry just said, to do with Ukraine, and it's absolutely right we help those poor people. They're coming here because of our responsibilities towards Afghanistanis who helped us in the war against terror. They're coming here because of what the Chinese government did to Hong Kong and the deal we have with people in Hong Kong. So this is unusually high figures, but there are good reasons, at least for some of them. I think one of the most interesting areas is students. 270-odd thousand, maybe 277,000 people in the year to June came here to try to study. Now, if you talk to the Department of Education, if you talk to the Foreign Office, I suspect they will not want to see curbs on those numbers because I would say they would argue that's good for our economy in the medium term, in the longer term. One thing that I do agree with Henry on is this. We have to be nuanced, we have to be sensible about the way we bring people to this country. It's very, very important that we have people to do the jobs that need filling at the moment. We are short-staffed in the NHS, we're short-staffed in the hospitality industry, but we also have to respect the fact that public services have to keep up with demand. So even though the vast majority of these people will be paying taxes, Henry is right to identify the problem about pace, about speed of immigration, because if you have too many people coming too quickly, schools, infrastructure, hospitals, GP surgeries and so forth, they can't necessarily keep up.
OK, so there's a lot to break down there. I think we'll come back to the student point. But Matthew mentioned that not everyone coming over here is seeking asylum, and that's sort of a very fair criticism. There is a backlog of 143,000 asylum claims in the system at the moment. Of them, over 100,000 are on benefits in the system. So they are net beneficiaries of our benefit system, of our tax-paying system. Henry, this should have been solved. One of the main promises of Brexit was better control of our borders, yet they seem to be more porous than ever. Does this show that Brexit was pointless in terms of controlling our borders?
No, absolutely not, Calvin. I've recently been saying, and I've said this previously as well, but Brexit has achieved its aim. The aim of Brexit, the purpose of Brexit, was to gain independence in all areas of law, government and public administration, so that our politicians in Westminster had the freedom to make the choices and the decisions that were necessary in the UK's best interests. And that included in borders. And of course, borders were given as an example of where the UK would gain additional sort of autonomy, if you like, in order to make its own decisions regarding immigration. Now, what we've seen is not a failure of Brexit. What we've seen is a failure of our politicians' vision, leadership, strategic acumen, and the ability to unite and drive efforts across government. That's the problem. And, I'm sorry, but when somebody comes out with a 10-point plan, that is not a plan. It is not a strategy. It's just an easily sold 10 points. But, there is no strategy, there is no plan, because the acumen, the skills, the toolkit doesn't exist in the hands of politicians or nowadays in civil servants. But, when we look at the numbers, there is no reason why, we cannot reduce the number of students. There is no reason why we can't reduce the number of people coming across the boats. I don't think anybody realistically expects immigration figures to come down to net zero, but we do expect a reduction. The other thing I would say is in terms of our own workforce, and I think this is a very important point, in terms of our own workforce, and, do we need skills from outside? Yes. But, if you come from most countries in the world, your medical qualifications, for example, and your studies will be paid for by your government. In the UK, that is not the case. So in the UK, if you want to qualify to be a nurse, you're going to have to pay for most of your training, most of your studies to get that qualification. And then you're going to have to pay your student loan back. If you come from abroad, you've not got any of that financial burden. So it's a much better, and you're going to get paid more here probably than you do abroad. So it's a much more sort of attractive option for a foreign student of medicine to be aiming to come to work for the NHS, either through an agency or directly, than it is for a UK student. And we've got a whole range of things to unpack there in terms of utilising our own workforce.
OK, so I want to take it back to the student conversation, because the government has said they want to cut down on the number of foreign students coming over for low-quality degrees. I would ask the question, why do we have low-quality degrees for anyone? But we'll get back to that. The point here is that if we cut foreign student numbers, if we put a cap on the limit of foreign students coming over and paying exorbitant amounts to go to our universities, we might have to close a few universities. We might be left with a few better universities remaining open. We might have to reduce the number of courses available, and we might then eventually be able to reduce the fees for everyone who goes to university. Do you think that would be a good solution?
I'm broadly speaking a fan of university, although I do think we're quite snobbish in this country. I think there should be a greater focus on apprenticeships, I think more credit needs to be given to people who do manual jobs. Now, you might get some university academics who say plumbers earn a lot more than we do. What are you talking about? But I do think that we are hindered in this country by a snobbishness. If you go to Germany, for example, there's a far higher premium put on manufacturing, on making things, on making your own stuff as a country. And our manufacturing sector has really suffered over recent decades. And that's partly, I think, about people looking down their nose at those who do work more with their hands and perhaps with the academic side of their brain. So I've got some sympathy for that. On the student issue, something I learned, every day is a school day for all of us, isn't it? And there's something I learned since these immigration figures came out, and that is that if you are an international student, as I understand it, you're entitled to bring some dependents, or you're entitled to bring some family members. So you might be able to bring your parents, you might be able to bring your children. Now, that's something perhaps we need to tighten up on, particularly if those people are going to be able to get free healthcare and free education and so forth. If you come here as a student, my suggestion would be you should come here alone, you should study. If you want to integrate, if you want to get a job at the end of it, if that's going to become easier because you studied at universities, fantastic, you're going to contribute to our economy, you're going to make us a stronger nation. But bringing family members, I'm not so sure about. Well, one other really important thing in this whole debate is this, I think. the government has to be responsible and sensible in the way it talks about this. So Henry Bolton and I, we disagree about a lot. We might clash on Twitter and so forth. But this conversation so far has, I think, been reasonably sensible and reasonably responsible. What is not sensible and what is not reasonable is for the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, just weeks ago, creating a rod for her own back, inflaming hate, inflaming suspicion by saying we need to drive down immigration figures to tens of thousands. Look at the way what that did to the Tory party over the last 12 years. Cameron said it in 2010. It's pie in the sky. You can't do that and have a functioning economy. It's partly what led to Brexit, and Brexit has made us poorer.
Well, I'll come back to Henry on that, because is that not the problem, that our economy is too reliant on cheap foreign labour? Surely we should be upskilling British talent. Surely we should be looking at other ways of addressing the gap in the GDP rather than plugging it with cheap immigration.
We absolutely should. But, I mean, earlier on, so the rate of this is one of the things that's difficult to cope with. And it's not only about public services, it's also about the social situation. And, it's not only that students can bring family members across, it's that most categories of people who just don't come, who are coming on anything but a tourist visa, can actually bring in family members, particularly if they're working. And then the language requirement is removed. So there is no requirement whatsoever for people such as that to learn English or to have any sort of introduction to the UK way of life.
Which is ridiculous.
That makes it
Sorry
more
to interrupt you, Henry, but I do want to ask you one more question, because we're limited on time. Because I'm hearing that we have an inadmissible system where we can label asylum seekers as inadmissible if they've travelled through a third safe country, something that a lot of us have been campaigning about for a long time. We already have that system in place. However, we haven't sent a single asylum seeker back to France as inadmissible.
That's correct. And part of the reason for that is, as I said earlier, the system itself is not being adapted to implement the decisions and the laws that are being passed. So, when you've not got the right returns agreement with France, how can you return people to France? I've argued a long time, well over 2-3 years, with regards to this and how we can put those structures in place, what they need to be. But it seems nobody is listening, and it's incredibly frustrating. I mean, the whole way we process these claims is fundamentally flawed. And if you speak to asylum lawyers, they will tell you the same thing if they're being honest. Some of them may be off record, but they will tell you that the whole system is dysfunctional. So, we've got ministers making decisions, we've got laws being passed, but we have not got the systems, the processes, the structures to implement them. And that's the problem here, Calvin. It's no good a minister saying, right, I want this to happen, we've passed a law, let's make it happen. I mean, you can see it in all sorts of different areas of work. We've got laws on animal slaughter, for example. We've got CCTV in every slaughterhouse, but it's not being monitored. I know that's a different topic, but there is no point in doing these things if you're not monitoring the results and if you're not enforcing them. And we've got the same thing in borders and, frankly, in education and healthcare. So
I think we've covered,
ministers can actually
we've covered a lot of ground. Thank you
both
very much for that. International security and border control expert Henry Bolton and political commentator Matthew Stadlen. Plenty more to come this afternoon on Real Britain. After the break, we're talking strikes. Nurses, teachers, rail drivers, you name it, they're all striking, and we'll discuss yet more disruption coming down the tracks after the break. First, let's have a look at the weather.
Let's take a look at the details. A wet evening to come across southwest England. The rain moving east will be heavy at times, which could lead to some localised flooding. Windy too, with gales around the coasts. Cloudy skies across southeast England with outbreaks of rain moving in from the west. The rain could turn heavy at times, especially later. Heavy rain is expected across southern Wales this evening, leading to the risk of flooding. Strong southerly winds continuing, but on the mild side. A cloudy evening across the Midlands with an increasing risk of rain. The wind also picking up for many. Mild for this time of the year with temperatures generally still in the double figures. A wet end to the day across northern England as heavy bursts of rain continue to move in from the west. Winds picking up, these brisk over the hills. Temperatures around 10 Celsius, further heavy rain for southern parts of Scotland, in particular through this evening, perhaps a few drier interludes at times. Windy for all, with temperatures around 10 degrees Celsius, turning drier across Northern Ireland this evening as the rain clears east. A few heavy showers moving in from the west, which could be accompanied by further strong and gusty winds. The wind and rain will continue to sweep eastwards overnight. And that is how your weather is shaping up.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something weird happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak. Stop talking.
My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
And it's about standards and public life. No, I'll tell you what's hypocrisy, Narendra.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin.
We believe in the UK.
No bias, no censorship.
It just doesn't make sense to me. He wasn't doing his job as Chancellor.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton Tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
Online and on your digital radio. The so-called winter of discontent shows no sign of thawing after the Royal College of Nursing announced on Friday morning that nurses across England, Wales and Northern Ireland will go on strike on the 15th and the 20th of December over their pay dispute with the government. Meanwhile, firefighters could be set to join nurses on the picket line after the Fire Brigades Union rejected a 5% pay increase and will begin balloting its members on strike action on December the 5th. And who better to discuss this than firefighter and trade unionist Paul Embry. First of all, Paul, thank you so much for joining us this Saturday. Can you tell us why you think firefighters are considering this strike action and whether you yourself would consider going on strike?
Yeah, hi, Calvin. I will be voting to take strike action in the ballot that's about to take place, being held by the Fire Brigades Union. I will do that very reluctantly. I think all firefighters will do that reluctantly. I'm pretty sure there's going to be a yes vote in that ballot. And the reason, Calvin, is that people in the fire service, just as elsewhere, are really struggling to make ends meet at the moment. I mean, firefighters, as you know, were on the front line during the pandemic, certainly also during the recent wildfires. And firefighters, I think, are just a bit angry at constantly being praised by politicians. But then when it comes to giving them a decent pay rise, they're told, well, there's not enough for you. We were originally offered 2%, which was rejected. The employers, the National Fire Service employers, then increased that to 5%. But obviously, with the current rate of inflation, that comes nowhere near to meeting what we need to be able to address the cost of living crisis. So, you know, even at this late stage, as the ballot is about to begin, I would urge the employers and the government to ensure there's sufficient funding to give firefighters, frankly, what they're worth.
Appreciate, Paul, that everyone deserves to be paid a good wage for a good day's work. However, are you not concerned about the impact the strike by firefighters might have on public safety?
Yes, and I don't know a single firefighter, Calvin, who won't be wrestling with their conscience when they come to vote in that ballot. I mean, it really is an agonising decision to have to take. I've been a firefighter for 25 years. I've taken strike action previously. I've never done it lightly. It's never been an easy thing to do. You do it only when you feel really that you've got no other option. But this dispute has been going on for about 6 months, and we have tried time and time again to say to the government and the employers, look, you need to come up with more funding. I know firefighters who are worried about buying their kids Christmas presents this year. I've never known a firefighter say that to me before in 25 years. I know firefighters who are worried about paying their energy bills, paying their mortgages. Now, when you consider that we ask these people day in, day out to put their lives on the line to protect the public, it's not too much, surely, to ask that firefighters shouldn't ever find themselves in that predicament, nor should any worker, frankly, where they're worrying about buying their kids Christmas presents and paying their mortgages. And that's what's made people angry, just the feeling that they're being undervalued. And I say as well, Calvin, that you know, we see constantly told there isn't enough money there, but actually people at the top end of the scale seem to be doing very well. Thank you very much. You know, some people did very well out of the pandemic. We see city bonuses going up. We see executive pay increasing. We see some of the corporations recording record profits. So the money is there to be found. It just takes the will on the part of government, I think.
That's all well and good, but these big fat cat city people are on private money rather than taxpayers' money. And obviously there's only so much taxpayers' money to go around, and we're all struggling right now. I understand the Fire Brigades Union rejected an offer of a 5% pay rise. How big a pay rise would be acceptable, and do you think it can be reached?
Well, the union hasn't tabled a definitive figure. What the union has said is, look, we need a pay rise that addresses the cost of living crisis and the crippling effect that that's having on our members. I mean, what we do know is it has to be something well above 5%. When we had an indicative ballot a few weeks ago on that 5% offer, it was something like 78% of firefighters rejected it on a very high turnout, 79% turnout. So that shows really the strength of feeling. And as I said, you know, I don't know a single firefighter who would take action as a first resort. You don't join the fire service to withdraw your labour. You join the fire service to protect people. And we know what it means when we withdraw our labour. We'll be taking that risk, and, you know, our own families as well will obviously be subject to that risk. So it's always very much a last resort. But as I said, even at this late stage, the strike action need not happen, but it just means that government and the National Fire Service employers need to put something on the table that recognises the worth of firefighters, and 5% comes nowhere near to that in the current economic situation.
Paul, a lot of us are worried because it's not just firefighters striking, it's teachers, it's nurses, it's the Royal Mail, and it's the train lines. Is this possibly coordinated? It feels like the country's going to be crippled this winter.
No, I mean, I don't think there's any kind of special coordination going on. I think what's happening is individual trade unions are responding to the situation. They're looking at the rate of inflation. They're looking at the impact that that's having on their members, many of them struggling to make ends meet. And as you would expect a trade union to do, they're all on an individual basis saying, look, this is not acceptable. We need more. I mean, I think, you know, of course, trade unions will organise with each other to try to maximise the effects of industrial action, but no trade union, I don't think, is kind of being dragged into it, inveigled into some overall strategy against their will. And, you know, the other point I would make, Calvin, we're about to head into potentially a very long and deep recession. I think the last thing we need to be doing in a recession is holding down pay, actually, because that's going to make the situation worse. It's going to have a detrimental impact on the economy. It's going to suffocate economic activity. That in itself will deplete tax revenues, with the potential that unemployment is going to go up. That's going to create potentially an even bigger deficit. I mean, you cannot cut your way out of a recession. I think history tells us that. So purely from an economic point of view, I think what the government is doing in terms of trying to keep the lid on pay as we go into a recession is not a wise thing to do. I think it's completely and actually literally counterproductive.
Okay, well, thank you for your enlightening perspective. That is firefighter and trade unionist Paul Embry. You are with GB News on TV and on DAB radio, and after the break, are fairy tales too dark for kids? In a poll, almost half of parents say Hansel and Gretel is inappropriate, with 90% of people surveyed saying they perpetuate gender stereotypes. Do these classics need updating, or do these parents need to grow up? Now it's time for a check on those news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Good afternoon, it's 2:33. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. The London Fire Brigade's chief says firefighters face being sacked if they're found to have bullied or been racist, misogynistic or homophobic. Andy Rose says there will be a zero-tolerance approach after an independent review into the culture within the service. The report revealed accounts from a black firefighter who had a noose placed by his locker, women being groped and people having their helmets filled with urine. The review was commissioned after a trainee firefighter took his own life in 2020. At least 13 people are missing after a landslide in Italy. No deaths have been confirmed, according to Italy's government, but a number of people are feared to have been killed in the incident on the holiday island Ischia, which has been hit by heavy rain in recent days. Emergency services say they're continuing the search and rescue operation as buildings have been engulfed by the landslide. Rail strikes by train drivers continue today, with more travel disruption expected for passengers. Members of ASLEF across 11 train operators are walking out in a dispute over pay, meaning a significantly reduced service. The General Secretary of ASLEF is due to meet the Transport Secretary, Mark Harper, next week to discuss the dispute. And the yellow weather warnings are now in place for large parts of the UK. A warning by the Met Office for rain and strong winds will be affecting southern England, Wales and Scotland. The warnings in Wales and England will stay in place until 3 a.m. tomorrow morning. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Calvin's back in a moment.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12, on TV, on radio and online.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back to Real Britain on GB News, on TV, online and on your digital radio. Writing in the Mail Online this week, columnist Peter Hitchens says that the so-called sabotage of grammar schools during the 1960s made Britain less equal and caused grammar schools the true pioneers of levelling up. A ban on the opening of new grammar schools has been in place since 1998, but their sabotage began in the 1960s when Labour politician Anthony Crossland was in education in the DfE. He reportedly was hell-bent on destroying every grammar school in the country. So were they the true pioneers of levelling up, and should we bring them back? Joining me now to discuss this is Peter Hitchens himself. Peter, thank you for joining us. Can you just first of all begin by outlining why you think grammar schools are the true pioneers of levelling up?
Well, it's very simple. What they did was they allowed children from poor homes to obtain the best education possible. They didn't do this as widely as they could have done. They needed all kinds of help, which they didn't get at the time, but they were already having an enormous effect in the 20 brief years when they existed in this country, in bringing many, many people into professions and into educated areas of life who were previously being excluded from them because there were no routes by which they could rise to the top and fully use their talents. And the nation also lost their talents because they struggled and drowned in schools where they could not succeed. And then after that 20 years is over and the comprehensive experiment began, they were left to drown again. And so we now lose an enormous amount of talent. And at the same time, there are thousands of individual tragedies of boys and girls who cannot get the education their talents would actually suggest they deserve and need. If you're going to choose, all good schools are selective in one way or another. If you're going to choose who goes to the good schools, it seems to me that it's far better to choose them on the basis of ability than the way we use now, which is the basis of parental wealth. It's National Offer Day each March. Every child in the country who's going to a state school has his or her future decided arbitrarily and forever on the basis of their parents' postcode. And this is bizarrely what the supposedly socially concerned left wing of this country actually supports: selection by wealth for the better schools. I think it would be far better if we returned. I don't think it's likely, I have to say, but it would also be far better if we returned to the much more fair and rational system of selecting children for the best schools on the basis of their ability to benefit from them.
Absolutely. It does seem to me that the biggest argument people make against grammar schools is based on the 11+ itself, on the entry criteria. How do you respond to that?
Well, several things. I mean, the 11+ has been much attacked. It was, in some ways, a rather noble attempt to remove class prejudice from the selection of children. It had many faults, some of which was straightforward, technical and scientific and wrong understandings of the nature of intelligence. The others, of course, the difficulty that any arbitrary test is bound to be unfair to some people. Myself, I don't favour it. I don't think that 11 is the right age. And I think that the German system, because Germany still very much has selective state grammar schools, the German system of selection by assessment is better. It's not essential to grammar schools to have the 11+, and it's a diversion from the real argument, which is, do you prefer ability or wealth to decide who goes to the best schools and who gets the best opportunities in the country?
There have been a lot of critics saying that there's actually no difference between grammar schools and comprehensives in terms of results anyway, but I saw in your Mail Online article you had some clear evidence that showed the otherwise, with a large sample size.
Well, I think the evidence is clear. I don't see how anyone can maintain that. What's happened, the most obvious way for those of us who've lived through it, in which we can see this, is that the examinations in this country have had to be watered down and devalued to such an extent to cope with comprehensive education. The old O-levels and A-levels of the pre-comprehensive era were much, much tougher and required much, much more rigour and application than the current ones do. That's not the fault of the children who take them. They're not to be blamed, but for the fact that they're taking substandard exams. But the whole curriculum, the whole basis of secondary education in this country, and of course, as a result, primary education, which used to work towards getting people into grammar schools if it could, the whole basis of our state education has been devalued by the introduction of comprehensive schools. And these schools themselves are often, where they're in well-off areas, bastions of privilege. This isn't me saying so. It's the Sutton Trust and Teach First who've done surveys showing that the comprehensives are deeply socially selective, as indeed, and I should add here before someone starts going on about it, as indeed are the remaining grammar schools, which are mainly in well-off areas and totally besieged by middle-class parents trying to avoid paying £200,000 in taxed income for private school fees.
Right, so is the problem here not that we've lost track of how to be aspirational and we've lost track of how to thrive towards success, and in fact we're looking more to be egalitarian in that all schools have to be equally poor?
Well, I don't think anybody would set it out as their objective that all schools would be equally poor. The original utopians who decided to push for grammar schools, many of them actually paid up communists, with a capital C, were doing so in the genuine belief that they would make a better society, a more equal society by doing this. The truth is, however, that 50 years of experience has shown that they were wrong. It was a mistake. Now, if you were in a car with somebody and he took a wrong turning off the M25 and was aiming for Manchester, but then you realised from the signs that he was heading for the Channel and then for Belgium and then for Berlin, you'd surely say to him, look, you've made a mistake. And he would surely say, well, actually, certainly by the time he reached Warsaw, he'd begin to recognise he wasn't going to get to Manchester. But the problem with the comprehensive fanatics is they refuse to recognise the mistake. They pretend that because there are huge numbers of people who are getting certificates, which are about as devalued as the Zimbabwe dollar, means that education has improved. It plainly hasn't. They won't admit the mistake, and until they do admit the mistake, they'll carry on driving until they get to Peking. It's absurd, the way in which the left have made so many of these mistakes, educational, social, and governmental in general, in the past 50 years, and they cannot see that they've got it wrong. It's just another way. The dogma rises way above the facts.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that, Peter Hitchens, columnist at The Mail on Sunday. And do read his article on this because it was spot on. Now, joining me is political commentator Matthew Stadlen with me in the studio. Matthew, what are your thoughts on grammar schools? I tend to think we'll disagree on this one.
Well, I'm not sure I totally agree with all of Peter's premises. My sense, and it's very difficult, I think, to judge the quality of education across the board because so much of it is anecdotal. My sense, anecdotally, is education is getting better in this country. State school education is getting better. Who do we thank for that, if I'm right? Do we thank the new Labour government because sometimes reforms take time to come through, or do we thank the Tory government of the last 12 years? It's very difficult to know. My sense is things are getting better. Do I support social mobility? Absolutely. I think you, Peter, and I would all agree that the more children that we can drag up the hierarchy in this country from poorer backgrounds, the better. The question is, first of all, how do you achieve that? Are grammar schools definitively better at doing that than the comprehensive schools of today? That's the first question. I'm not sure I totally agree that grammar schools would achieve that result. The second thing is a caveat. Although we absolutely want to move poorer kids up the social tree, up the ladder, we don't want to leave people behind. And the worry is, and Peter's no longer here, but he would dispute this, the worry is that the old secondary moderns were not quite a race to the bottom, but was absolutely leaving a lot of children in their millions behind.
So
grammar school kids thrive.
He did address this in his article, and actually the evidence suggests that both grammar schools and secondary moderns both outperformed comprehensives. So I think, going back to what you said earlier about having a renewed emphasis on vocational learning, on technical skills and abilities, and getting rid of that snobbery that everyone has to be academic, that would help this situation a lot. If we could say, look, these are technical colleges, and that's fine, that's fantastic even, and a lot of people aren't supposed to go to university, and here are the grammar schools for people with the academic ability to go on into further education. That might solve a lot of our problems, actually, in this skills shortage that we have.
I read the article too. It's a very interesting article. I mean, it's very persuasive in many ways. I think Peter was looking at evidence in the final 10 years before grammar schools started to be booted out by that Labour government in the 1960s. So I'm not sure how definitive that is. Absolutely, we need to focus much more than we do on technical abilities and up that. Give status to people who make our economy work. The sorts of people who fix our homes, who build our homes and so forth, they're absolutely as valuable as people who are teaching classics at university, as valuable as TV presenters or producers such as yourself, Calvin. I'm just not convinced, though, that people who are told their failures effectively, not intentionally, at the age of 11, or possibly even 13 if you raised it, and Peter said in his article he might, I think, move it up to 13. You don't want people to have that sense of failure at that age, and it's too young to say to people, OK, right, we're giving up on you academically, and we're going to channel you through down a technical
The problem is
route.
you're arguing against the 11 plus rather than comprehensive system, which is selective based on academic ability. We could have different routes in. It wouldn't necessarily have to be the 11 plus.
Just very quickly, in my area, in Notting Hill, is actually, I mean, some people think it's a rich area because of the film, is incredibly diverse, and there are some really, really good state schools that I intend to send my children to, if I'm lucky enough for them to get in there by catchment area. The idea that it's purely a postcode lottery in the state system.
I also live in your area.
It's
not
not
many good state schools for boys. There are good options for girls, but not for boys.
Well, the schools I'm talking about are mixed.
Well, if you look at their Ofsted rating and you look at their grade results from GCSE and A-level, they're not that good, the mixed ones. There are some good state girls' schools in that area, but that's the problem. We need more choice for parents. Anyway, lots of you have been getting in touch today about these topics. And Alan says on immigration numbers, what stupid government officials thought it was a good idea to allow students to come to this country to study and bring up to 4 family members with them? Absolute insanity. The level of incompetence in the government and civil service is staggering. Alan, I have nothing to add to that because you just articulated my views perfectly. Elizabeth, on training British workers, says, I do not feel that we invest anywhere near enough in apprenticeships or training for people in the over 50 age group. Lip service is often paid to it, but it is scarce. Is that scare or scarce? If you can find work, the cost of doing so is often prohibitive. Yep, it is a problem. We do need to talk more about how to retrain, especially as certain industries are dying out. Dan on the firefighter strike says, if anyone is paid by the taxpayer, they should not be allowed to strike. If they don't like it, they can go and see what it's like in the real world. Private sector employees have no such luxuries. Not entirely true, Dan. I get where you're coming from. I get your intention, but at the same time, we do need people in these roles, so we do need to make sure they're paid well and in a respectable field. But I see where you're coming from. Now, new research from the charity Centrepoint suggests there are 86,000 young people experiencing homelessness in the UK, with 8,500 of them in the West Midlands alone. In Birmingham, many of them turn towards local charities like St Basil's, and every year they host a big event called the Big Sleep Out to raise tens of thousands of pounds for their youth homelessness prevention work. Our reporter Jack Carson went along last night to find out more.
An annual event since 1990, the St Basil's Big Sleep Out challenges people to sleep rough for one night in an effort to raise money for the campaign to prevent youth homelessness in Birmingham. It's a night which easily raises thousands of pounds for the charity every year, and Head of Fundraising Barry Hodge says the event has never been more important.
This is our flagship fundraiser. It raises the most money out of all the events that we do throughout the year, and ultimately it allows us to be able to provide that much needed support for young people living in the West Midlands.
And for people here tonight doing it, what can they expect? I can see tinsel, I can see boxes. Yeah. What have we got?
It's one of those bizarre events that it's a coming together of people from all different walks of life. We've got schools that are here tonight, we've got faith groups that are here tonight, we've got big corporates that are here tonight, we've got people from local government that are here tonight that are taking part in this event. It's a bringing together because people are united in this stance of homelessness should not be part of growing up, homelessness should not be part of our society. So ultimately what they'll experience tonight is, for the first half it will be this very relaxed, friendly atmosphere, but the truth is when midnight kicks in and this event starts proper, the realities of the thing that we are trying to prevent will kick in. And I tell you something, for a lot of the people who do this event, it's not the actual doing the event where the realisation kicks in, it's the bit where they get home, they have a shower and they get into their own bed and realise that they're not going to have to do it again tonight, and that's the moment that will stick in their head forevermore.
The people here all get given cardboard and plastic sheeting to create their own accommodation for the night, and people get pretty creative with their designs too. But behind the box, there's a more serious reason why people take part.
We wanted to come to show how it is like living on the streets like a homeless person, and like how they have to like use cardboards and they can't actually have like a proper roof over their head because they don't have enough money.
So it just felt like a really good thing to do for us together, to do something that obviously affects people in our community, and see what it's like for them.
The charity Centrepoint estimates a 33% increase in the homeless population in England by 2024. As Birmingham is the youngest city in the country, many of the people that fall into it here will be aged below 24. It's why St Basil's focuses so much of its work on prevention.
It is really about refocusing where the priorities are. As a country, we tend to focus on crisis, and the old saying goes, if you always focus on crisis, all you're ever going to get is crisis. So the issues that we're trying to resolve are much further upstream. So we're working in schools, we're working in colleges. I mean, I'll give you a quick example. I was at a school today talking to the young people about homelessness, because we know if we catch people when things start to, maybe fall apart, we can prevent them from ending up in a situation where they're going to have to rely on a charity like us, or rely on, local councils, or, anything else, because ultimately that is what we're about, that is what we're trying to achieve.
Many people this Christmas will be on the brink of becoming homeless. If they do, charities like St Basil's, thanks to donations from people at events like this, will be there to support them. Jack Carson, GB News.
Thank you very much, Jack. Now, according to a new survey, more than 40% of Brits under the age of 30 believe that traditional fairy tales such as Hansel and Gretel and Little Red Riding Hood are inappropriate for children. As many as 90% of those surveyed said that fairy tales were too old-fashioned and to be read as bedtime stories, and 89% said they perpetuated gender stereotypes. Hansel and Gretel, in which two children roast a cannibalistic witch to death in her own oven, was deemed the most inappropriate amongst members of Generation Z. With 46% saying it was an inappropriate bedtime story. To break down this story, I'm joined by John Milbank, Emeritus Professor of Theology and Religious Studies at the University of Nottingham. Good to see you, John. Thank you for joining us. I honestly can't get my head around this, so just break this down for me, please. The findings of the survey show that a lot of young people under the age of 30 don't understand the role of fiction in the lives of children.
I think it's incredibly disturbing. It suggests that people are totally alienated from their own culture. They no longer understand what fiction means. And above all, they no longer understand children, because children don't discover danger from stories. Children already know about danger. Children already have to overcome fears. And children love role-playing and extending their imagination. It's part of their practicing for adulthood. It's part of their wondering about what values are. And these very, very traditional stories that are the products of centuries of distilled collective folk wisdom are exactly what help them to do that. They're kind of dusky stories that exist between daytime and twilight, between the conscious and the unconscious, between the earthly and the unearthly. And that's exactly why they need to be read to children at bedtime.
Absolutely. Fairy tales are meant to be adopted and passed down to the next generation. That's the purpose of tradition, isn't it? But is the problem here not that Generation Z do not respect or understand the importance of tradition?
Yeah, well, that's their problem. I mean, the idea that they necessarily know better than, accumulated generations of wisdom is just peculiar. And this doesn't necessarily mean that we agree about everything, that we don't agree about everything in Shakespeare, for example. Yet that doesn't mean that he doesn't have something to teach us. And sometimes it's the very otherness of these stories that matter. And I think it's significant that children are really more at home in a world of kings and queens and fairies and princesses than they are in the modern world, because there is a sense in which children have to repeat the childhood of the human race, if you like. So they first of all understand symbols and metaphors before they understand abstract concepts. And to deprive them of all that is appalling. And it's good for adults. We need to go back to these metaphorical roots of our understanding of reality.
Absolutely.
And an ability to take on different roles. It's an interaction.
Well, thank you very much for that, John Milbank, Emeritus Professor of Theology and Religious Studies at University of Nottingham. You are watching Real Britain. Plenty more coming up on today's show, but first, here is a short break.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere. Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
I think I've seen probably quite enough of Matt Hancock to last me a lifetime.
I'll also be getting to know you better, travelling to find out what you think about the politicians who are fighting for your vote.
They've got to get this country back on track.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. only on GB News, on TV, radio and online.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello and welcome. This is Real Britain on your TV, radio and online. And coming up this hour, Sir Keir Starmer this week made a series of policy announcements designed to appeal to former Labour voters in the so-called Red Wall. But can he win back those votes? And should ideas like critical race theory and the patriarchy be taught in schools? But first, it's the news with Tatiana Sanchez.
Good afternoon. It's coming up to 3 o'clock. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. An independent review into the London Fire Brigade has found the service to be institutionally misogynist and racist. Our national reporter Theo Chikomba is outside the LFB's headquarters for us. Theo, what can you tell us about this new report?
That's right. Well, Nazir Afzal, the former chief Crown Prosecutor for the North West, and his team of 8 looked into the culture here at the London Fire Brigade over a 10-month period, looking into what's been happening here in practice. Now, just to give you one example, a Muslim man, he was constantly bullied about his religion and had bacon and sausages put in his coat pocket and a terrorist hotline sign posted outside of his locker. Now, in response, the London Fire Brigade as Commissioner Andy Rowe has accepted this review and has said it's unacceptable and there will be consequences for staff going into the future. There have been 23 recommendations given in this report looking into how they can build a system which takes complaints, takes them on and ensures that this doesn't happen and those people can be taken out of the system, and as well a system where they can spot red flags as well. And just finally, Nazir Afzal spoke in a press conference briefly today, and he said if fire brigade staff are saying they aren't safe, then neither are we.
Thank you, Theo Chikomba, our national reporter there for us. Well, Commissioner Rowe has vowed to change the culture and welcomed the recommendations made by the review.
We're going to conduct a 5-year case review, so we look back across all those cases, those terrible behaviours, those examples of bullying and harassment which have been considered before in AFB and put them back through that externally accredited process, and I do expect some people to be dismissed as a result. We will become the first service in the country to wear body-worn video cameras to ensure both the safety of our own staff and to reassure the public. So those are examples of what we're doing immediately.
At least 13 people are missing after a landslide in Italy. No deaths have been confirmed, according to Italy's government, but a number of people are feared to have been killed in the incident on the holiday island Ischia, which has been hit by heavy rain in recent days. Emergency services say they're continuing the search and rescue operation as buildings have been engulfed by the landslide. Train cleaners have voted to strike over pay in what would be the biggest industrial action in the industry. The rail, maritime and transport unions say more than 1,000 of its members, working for several private contractors, backed the industrial action. It says rail strikes by train drivers continue today, with more travel disruption expected. Members of ASLEF across 11 train operators are walking out in a dispute over pay, meaning a significantly reduced service. Ukraine's President Zelensky has hosted a food security summit with the Prime Ministers of Belgium, Poland and Lithuania and the President of Hungary today. This comes as the United Nations is calling for humanitarian aid for people in Ukraine who have been left without power following Russian attacks. It's after President Zelensky says 6 million people are without electricity after the series of rocket attacks earlier on this week. The mayor of Ukraine, Vitaly Klitschko, says about 70% of households in Kyiv still have no power. Meanwhile, British intelligence says Russia's removing nuclear warheads from old cruise missiles before using them for attacks in Ukraine. The MOD says the move highlights Moscow's low stock of long-range missiles. England manager Gareth Southgate played down boos by disappointed fans following the Lions' draw with USA in the World Cup last night. It means the team missed out on a chance to guarantee a place in the last 16. Supporters at a fan zone in South London appeared unhappy by the result, throwing cups and spraying drinks. England will face Wales next, with the latter needing a victory to keep up their chances of making the knockout stages. Former England manager Sam Allardyce says he's still hopeful England can win the tournament.
There's enough experience in the backroom staff, the manager, there's enough experience in the squad now, having gone through 2 tournaments, that they've got the tools to win this competition. But Gareth needs to use the squad to its full potential, and that means, for me, quite a few changes for the next game.
And Flashdance and Fame singer Irene Cara has passed away at the age of 63. The Oscar and Grammy-winning musician is best known for singing and co-writing the song Flashdance, What a Feeling. Her publicist announced her passing in her Florida home on Twitter. The cause of death is still unknown. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Real Britain with Calvin.
Welcome to Real Britain with me, Calvin Robinson. Here's what's coming up on the show. Sir Keir Starmer has pledged that Labour will cut taxes for working people when the economy stabilises. He also says he will not seek a Swiss-style post-Brexit trade agreement with the EU and says we must wean our economy off immigration. Is Keir's recipe to win back the working class vote? And later on, it's been revealed that some of the UK's top scientists, including Sir Patrick Vallance, were warned that COVID-19 could have evolved in a lab, but decided not to investigate the theory of any further activity, suppressed the lab leak theory, and we will discuss that. Then, according to a new report, the London Fire Brigade is institutionally misogynistic and racist. The report found that a black firefighter had a noose placed in his work locker, and a female firefighter was sent a video of a male colleague exposing himself. I'll be asking, what can we learn from this report? And that's what we're talking about for next hour. I'd love to know your thoughts. Tweet me at GBNews, or you can email me gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can watch us online too on YouTube. And don't forget Facebook, you'll find lots of brilliant content on the GB News page. Let's go. Sir Keir Starmer this week made a series of policy statements which will undoubtedly endear him to former Labour voters in the so-called Red Wall. He pledged to cut taxes for working people when the economy stabilises. He rejected a Swiss-style trade deal with the EU and said this is no time for a Scottish independence referendum. And earlier this week, he told the Confederation of British Industry that Britain must end its economic dependence on cheap migrant labour. So I'm asking, can Labour win back the working class? Now joining me is Dr. Philip Kisserly, who is a cultural historian and lecturer at the University of Leeds and also can be seen on New Culture Forum, and political commentator Matthew Stadlam. Can Keir Starmer win the working class? Let's start with you, Philip.
Well, I think it's the election is his to lose, I would say. I think that's probably the best way to look at it. I don't think he can win back the working class because I don't think they trust him. They certainly don't trust him on the economy. There's been a poll out over the last couple of weeks that says that, and they don't trust him on culture either. He's got this two-prong attack. One on the economy, all of the things that you've just said, but they don't trust him, but also on culture. But let's just bear in mind what he is. He is Mr. EU. He's the Remainer kid. And that's what people think of him as. And he's saying that the Labour Party is the party that's going to support women. Yet this is the person who can't identify what a woman is. He can't actually say that a woman is an adult human female. So I think a lot of this stuff, one, comes down to trust, okay? And no matter what he says, I don't think that people will support him. That's not to say that they trust the Conservative Party, because my God, they don't, and they shouldn't do. But I think other kind of factors will come into play. I think the smaller parties will have a much bigger role this time. I think particularly the SDP and Reclaim. Okay, but there's also the kind of wild card. I was looking at the Telegraph. I'm just looking now because I made a note earlier that almost a quarter of people would vote for a Nigel Farage-led party. So I think all eyes are on your colleague and what's he going to do, because I think that will make a massive difference. So, as I said at the beginning of this, it's his to lose.
Yeah.
And he probably will do.
I'm also waiting to see what my colleague will do. Matthew Stadlen, is this all rhetoric from Sir Keir Starmer, or will he actually win back the red seats?
Well, first of all, on your colleague, Sir Keir Starmer, who used to be a colleague of mine when we were both LBC presenters, this is a man who I think ran to be an MP himself for what? I think he did it 7 times.
You mean Nigel Farage?
8 times, Nigel Farage, exactly. And he didn't get elected as an MP. So he was an MEP. He's undoubtedly, in some ways, one of the most successful politicians. I do disagree with many of the things that come out of his mouth. He's a hugely successful politician. But he failed time and time and time again to become an MP, even when Brexit was a live issue, even in the build-up to the Brexit referendum of 2016. So that poll may have some substance. I'm not so sure. I don't think Nigel Farage will re-enter frontline politics. I'm sure he's comfortable enough in the GB News studio. What I'll say about Keir Starmer is this. The British public want stability. They want to be able to afford their heating. They want to be able to afford their mortgages. They want to be able to afford food. That's what we all want. We want to be able to put food on our table. We don't want to have to choose between heating and eating. Whether you're working class, lower middle class, upper middle class, whatever you happen to be, that is at the heart of everyday life. The Conservatives have had 12 years at this, and we are in an almost unprecedented mess. An unprecedented mess in modern times, anyway. Rishi Sunak has done something to steady the ship, and I'll give him that. And he's done that with Jeremy Hunt as Chancellor. And they will be a tougher egg to crack, I think, for Starmer than either Liz Truss or the populism of Boris Johnson, given how Boris Johnson's star fell in recent months, and you could say years as well. So it's not an easy challenge for Starmer, but I think he can do it. And I think he can do it for this reason. People are fed up of things not working. And yes, as I say, Sunak has done something to mend the bridge, but I don't think he's done enough. In terms of the EU point, yes, Starmer has some ground to make up, because undoubtedly some of those red wall seats fell to Boris Johnson, not just because of the toxicity of Jeremy Corbyn, and I think Corbyn was toxic, but because of the Brexit issue. And as our other guest says just now, it's absolutely true that Starmer was seen as Mr. EU. He's had to adapt, and I think he's adapted both in ridding the party of the toxicity of the Corbynites, ridding the party of the spectre of anti-Semitism, but he's also adapted on migration. And I hope we can believe him that he is committed to upskilling people who already live here. Where I might diverge from him is that he needs to be bolder in making the case that for our economy to function, as we were talking about earlier on your show, Calvin, for the economy to function, we do, in the short term at least, need people coming from abroad. Otherwise, our NHS will continue to be on its knees, and our hospitality sector, amongst others, will struggle.
I would argue it's on its knees because we have so much immigration coming up. I'll come back to you in a minute, Philip, because I do want to ask Matthew on this while we're talking about the economy. I like the policies. I like the idea that Labour will cut taxes for working people. Sounds good to me. I like the idea that we must wean the economy off cheap immigration. Sounds good. But, first of all, do I believe them? No, probably not. But secondly, is this enough? Are economic issues enough? What about what Philip mentioned earlier, that the Labour Party can't seem to define what a woman is, never mind support women? The social issues matter, right?
I think they matter a little bit. I don't think they matter as much as media organisations such as GBNews, the Daily Mail, LBC, whatever it is. I don't think they matter as much as people running those organisations and presenting those organisations seem to think, or that Twitter, for example, seems to think. But look, if I were Keir Starmer and someone said, "Do you know what a woman is?" I'd be able to say, "Yes, I know what a woman is." And if someone said, "Well, can a woman have a penis?" I would say, "Well, no, women don't have penises, but trans women do have penises." And I back trans rights as far as they possibly can until they collide with women's rights in real ways. Okay. I think those real ways are very limited. So if I were Keir Starmer, I have a common sense approach to this. You've got women, you've got men, you've got trans women, you've got trans men. Let's be kind in our language to everybody. Let's be as inclusive as we can. And where there is a genuine clash of rights, let's try to untangle that, but without the transphobic language.
OK. And Philip, I want to ask you, is Keir Starmer now to the right of the Tories? It seems on these issues, cutting taxes for working people and weaning us off cheap immigration or cheap immigrant labour, these seem to be issues right of where the Tories are right now.
Yeah, but the Tories aren't conservative, and I think that's the major problem, and they've not been conservative for years, decades. I think just one or two things to come back to your other guest, and I agree with lots and lots of what he says. I don't think it's about adapting. I think it's equivocation, and I think there's a difference there. And he kept saying all the time, "If I were Keir Starmer," you're not Keir Starmer, and he isn't saying those things. So I think there's people do really care about culture in the red wall seats. They care about tradition, and they care actually about reality. And I think the easiest, the most simple reality check is asking the question, what is a woman? And if someone can't answer that, I think they're very, very concerned. It really isn't. I'm on the New Culture Forum every week, and we get tons and tons of questions about this, right? If you can't describe what a woman is, then you really can't advocate for women's rights. Okay, and that's what they're saying at the moment, and the two things really don't go together. They came out yesterday saying they are the party for women's rights, but they can't define what a woman is, so they are really not the party for women's rights. I would really disagree with the culture thing. I think culture is front and centre at the moment, and I think that's why the Labour Party are pushing it so hard.
Yeah, I would say the only reason we talk about cultural issues is because they're important to people. We don't talk about things that people don't necessarily care about. So, Matthew, is Starmer now too close to Blairism for many Labour supporters? In his attempt to attract the red wall back, is he going to lose the hard left that have been supporting the Labour Party?
I'm starting to sound like a Labour politician, aren't I? I'm starting to use the word look the whole time. No, listen. Tony Blair, I didn't agree with him on everything. I certainly didn't agree with him on the Iraq War, particularly in retrospect. But that guy was an election winner. He won Labour 3 elections in a row, along with some of the leaders from the 1930s or 1940s. Clem Attlee, for example, he's one of the titans of the Labour movement. So if Keir Starmer had anything like Tony Blair's success, then those on the left, most of those on the left, will be cheering to the rafters. Unfortunately, and I'm broadly speaking, I would describe myself as left of centre, not as left as Corbyn, didn't vote for Labour under Corbyn in 2017 or 19, but Starmer doesn't have the charisma of Tony Blair. Does that matter? Perhaps not. It may matter a little bit more up against Rishi Sunak, because Rishi Sunak, I think, although on immigration and the rhetoric and the language he's allowed his Home Secretary to use, Surada Braverman, and the fact that he reappointed her, that's very disappointing. He's still something of a grown-up in the room. I don't believe Liz Truss was a grown-up in the room. I don't believe that Boris Johnson was a grown-up in the room. And against that, the fact that Starmer didn't have charisma perhaps might have been in his favour. Against Sunak, it's going to be more difficult, because Sunak is a serious politician in many ways. Do I think he can win back the working class vote? First of all, he's absolutely right. We talked about the immigration stuff. He's absolutely right to say that when the economy allows, if it ever does, he's going to make sure he cuts taxes for working people. Because you can see that working people feel like they've got a really bad deal at the moment. Don't forget, by the way, a lot of working people are on benefits as well, and it's right that benefits went up with inflation. But people are working incredibly hard in this country, and they're getting to see very little reward for it. So Starmer is right to target that. On the culture thing, come up with simple, sensible, common-sense answers. Don't muck about. You do have to win that battle as best you can, but you don't have to win it in a race to the bottom. You don't have to win it by using nasty language. And it's obvious to me that Starmer is not quite nailing this, but it's not obvious to me, as Philip says, that he's not a supporter of women's rights. Of course he is. It's just a knotty issue, and he has to get the right language when it comes to the trans debate.
Isn't that the problem, though, Philip, that we obsess over the language, or the left obsesses over the language, and spends all day talking about the language, never gets to the actual issue at hand, and actually calls a lot of things hate or nasty, as Matthew just did, what might not be hateful or nasty. It might actually just be common sense to some people. And especially if we're talking about the trans debate, to a lot of people in this country, they will say, well, there are men and there are women, and that is it. So how do you address these issues with what Matthew calls common sense if we don't all agree with what that is?
I think the language thing is really incredibly important, and we talk about this all the time, don't we? There's a sense that we say certain things, but we actually mean something else. And if we're saying trans women are women, and that's the centre of the debate, I don't think that should be the centre of the debate. I think women's safety should be the centre of the debate. You know, what happens when women-only spaces don't become women-only spaces anymore? So I don't think any of it actually is about hate or hate speech. And I think if people bring the word hate into a conversation like this, then I don't think they're acting honestly.
Some people do hate, Philip. That's the point. Some people, unfortunately, are using this sort of new incarnation of trans issues and the trans debate to propagate old-fashioned transphobia. And unfortunately, that's true.
That's a bad faith assumption, because most people are not coming to this conversation with hate.
There are plenty of people who do come to the conversation.
Speak on behalf of yourself.
Plenty of people who come to the conversation with hate. We just have to be sensible about this.
All right, thank you. Well, I think we'll leave it there, because we're treading on the trans water again. So Matthew Stadler, political commentator, and Dr. Philip Kisserly, cultural historian, lecturer at University of Leeds, and regular on the New Culture Forum. Thank you very much for joining us. Plenty more to come this afternoon on Real Britain. After the break, it's been revealed that some of the UK's top scientists, including Sir Patrick Vallance, were warned that COVID-19 could have evolved in laboratory animals, but they decided not to investigate any further, and indeed actively suppressed the lab leak theory. We will discuss this, but first of all, here is a short break. See you soon.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
I think I've seen probably quite enough of Matt Hancock to last me a lifetime.
I'll also be getting to know you better, travelling to find out what you think about the politicians who are fighting for your vote.
They've got to get this country back on track.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. only on GB News, on TV, radio and online.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
For helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV,
On radio and online.
we're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's
News channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
And it's about standards and public life. No, I'll tell you what's hypocrisy, Narendra.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin.
we believe in the UK.
No bias, no censorship.
It just doesn't make sense to me. He wasn't doing his job as Chancellor.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
I think I've seen probably quite enough of Matt Hancock to last me a lifetime.
I'll also be getting to know you better, travelling to find out what you think about the politicians who are fighting for your vote.
They've got to get this country back on track.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. only on GB News, on TV, radio and online.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back to Real Britain on GB News on TV, online and on your wireless. A report has alleged that top scientists, including Sir Patrick Vallance, who's Britain's chief scientific advisor, were warned that COVID-19 could have evolved in laboratory animals in Wuhan, but collaborated in a paper which shut down the lab leak theory. The Wuhan Institute of Virology's work on bat coronaviruses amid concerning security levels had also been highlighted to them. Their paper was published in Nature Medicine, in March 2020. It argued that a natural spillover event caused the pandemic. But according to the story, which also appeared in the Daily Telegraph, newly released emails show that in the weeks before publication, the authors held a discussion with top scientists and experts, and they were advised that the unusual features seen in COVID-19 could have evolved in animals in a lab. Let's talk now to biologist and author Matt Ridley. Thank you for joining us, Matt. Can you please explain to us why would Vallance and others wish to cover up this theory?
Well, this relates to an event that happened on the first weekend of February 2020, when COVID was still just a small little local difficulty in China, remember. But they'd seen the first glimpse of the genome of the virus. They thought, oh my God, it looks like it's got a feature in it that shouldn't be there, that's normally put there, that is sometimes put there by labs, and that could well be an indication that it's been developed in a laboratory. Now, we've known for some time that meeting took place. We've been trying to get hold of the emails about that meeting, and in particular, the drafts of the paper that they produced after that meeting. And sure enough, what we've now found, thanks to the release under Freedom of Information, is that the first draft of that paper said a lab leak was possible. But by the end of the following week, they had changed that to saying it was not possible. And the only excuse they'd done for that was that the Chinese had announced they'd found a similar virus in the pangolin. But the point is that by then they knew that the pangolin virus didn't have the feature that they were worried about. So they couldn't have used, it didn't make any sense to use the pangolin virus to excuse the to excuse what's going on. There clearly was a very strong desire to shut down speculation about a possible laboratory leak at the time for the sake of, quotes, international harmony. That's the phrase used by Francis Collins, the head of the National Institutes of Health in the United States.
Why should international harmony be a concern during the pandemic? And surely this altered our process and stops us probing further into the lab leak theory. Surely we want to know exactly where this virus came from so that we can better prepare and prevent.
Well, the result of that paper was that people like me went around saying to colleagues in Parliament and elsewhere that no, it probably wasn't a lab leak. I was taken in by this. And vital time was lost, during which the Chinese authorities had plenty of opportunity to cover their tracks, to conceal what had gone on, to make sure that we couldn't get hold of the database of viruses they had in the lab or the lab records and so on. And the trail went pretty cold. It wasn't until about a year later, when a huge accumulation of evidence, including evidence that they'd been party to a grant application to actually put one of these features into such a virus, and they hadn't found it in any other natural virus, and they hadn't found the virus in wild animals or anything like that, apart from bats. After all that, eventually, even the World Health Organization came around and said, well, the lab leak is possible. We now know it's not just possible, but it's likely. And we've lost 2 years, 2.5 years. And we've, crucially, during that time, we haven't cracked down on the kind of research that could have led to this problem.
But the further problems, or the further knock-on effect of this, is that we've got now mistrust in not only the science, but in experts. And surely, throughout this entire process, experts have been telling us to trust the science. How can we ever trust the science again?
Well, this is one of the things that really concerns me. I've been pro-science the whole of my career. I've championed biotechnology and lots of other sciences. I'm pro-vaccines, all these kind of things. But it makes it much harder for people like me to do our job if scientists say one thing in public and think something else in private, and go about changing their story for what seems to be political reasons rather than scientific ones. The politicization of science has become an extremely acute problem, in my view, and I think we've got to get to the bottom of it and stop doing it. Let's just get the facts out there and seek the truth wherever it leads us.
But that's the problem, isn't it? Because we didn't want people to seek the truth. We didn't want people to make up their own minds or to make informed decisions. The government and the country wanted one approved narrative. Even in the media, we were told by Ofcom that we couldn't question or undermine public health bodies. Do you think we should be able to be more critical of technocratic scientists in government in the future?
Yes, I think we do. I think the only way science keeps itself honest is by having an open and transparent conversation with the public, with other experts. There isn't such a thing as consensus in science most of the time. There was no consensus about the right way of dealing with COVID. Lockdowns, masks, vaccines, other things. There are two sides to most of these arguments, and it is reasonable to have them. And if you don't do that, if you say there is only one right answer and you ordinary people have got to do as you're told, then it's a very dangerous slippery slope. Facebook actually banned any conversations about a possible laboratory leak for about a year. That's not a way to go on. And they did so at the behest of establishment scientists.
Absolutely. It's so refreshing to hear you say this and speaking the truth. And hopefully we can be more truthful and scientists can be more truthful in the future. Thank you so much for that. That's Viscount Matt Ridley, biologist and author.
Thank you.
Now, responding to the allegations, a spokesperson for the government chief scientific advisor stated, "The government chief scientific advisor ensures that policies and decisions are informed by the best scientific evidence. The GCSA promises full transparency and an open exchange of ideas and scientific opinion, as the email exchange reflects." You are with GB News on TV and on DAB radio, and after the break, according to a new report, the London Fire Brigade is institutionally misogynistic and racist. We'll have more on this shortly. Now it's time for a check on those news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Thank you, Calvin. It's 3:31. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. The London Fire Brigade's chief says firefighters face being sacked if they're found to have been bullied or racist, misogynistic or homophobic. Andy Rose says there'll be a zero-tolerance approach after an independent review into the culture within the service. The report revealed accounts from a black firefighter who had a noose placed by his locker, women being groped and people having their helmets filled with urine. The review was commissioned after a trainee firefighter took his own life in 2020. At least 13 people are missing after a landslide in Italy. No deaths have been confirmed, according to Italy's government, but a number of people are feared to have been killed in the incident on the holiday island Ischia, hit by heavy rain in recent days. Emergency services say they're continuing the search and rescue operation as buildings have been engulfed by the landslide. Rail strikes by train drivers continue today, with more travel disruption expected for passengers. Members of ASLEF across 11 train operators are walking out in a dispute over pay, meaning a significantly reduced service. And yellow weather warnings are in place now for large parts of the UK. A warning by the Met Office for rain and strong winds will be affecting southern England, Wales and Scotland. The warnings in Wales and England will remain in place until 3 a.m. tomorrow morning. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back to Real Britain on GB News, on TV, online and on your digital radio. New research by Policy Exchange has revealed that activist teaching is now immensely widespread in the UK, with 6 in 10 pupils now saying they have been exposed to ideas of critical race theory. 65% also said that they encountered the idea of the patriarchy and multiple genders in school. The findings have restated that the debate over how Britain should teach history in its schools is still going on. Now joining me is Mark Glendening, Head of Cultural Affairs at the Institute of Economic Affairs, and political and social commentator Lynn May. Thank you both for joining me today. Now, should we be teaching our children this divisive rhetoric? We'll start with you, Lynn May.
I think there's no issues or nothing wrong with teaching it as an ideology, but as a fact, I'm massively against this. All schools have a statutory duty to be politically impartial. And what we're seeing teachers teaching it in such a way where it's being taught that white people are bad, all white people should be guilty of the past, and that's simply not true. And I always say this repeatedly, only a small fraction of white individuals were responsible for the transatlantic slave trade, and even in its entirety, it wasn't just white people. So why are young children having to be subjected to this?
I mean, there's so many things being conflated in this, that's the problem, isn't it?
Yes.
Mark, I don't even think we can teach about critical race theory in schools, can we? Because we can't, that's not what school's for, that's university level debate, and it's dangerous bringing this ideology into schools in the first place.
Yes, absolutely. This is not something children should be indoctrinated with in the same way they shouldn't be indoctrinated with any particular ideological perspective. And when this is taught or brought into the realm of public sector institutions, then counter-narratives which are based on liberal rationalist methodology, unlike critical race theory, which is essentially just a sort of conspiracy theory, really, an updated version of the sort of stuff the fascists were coming out with in the 30s about Jewish people being part of some sort of power elite and other such nonsense, then there should be the opportunity to present an alternative perspective. But of course, that is not what is happening at the moment. The intention of the public sector institutions, schools, the police, you name it, is in fact to try and brainwash their employees and their pupils with a one-sided narrative.
Yeah. No, sorry, I just have to come back on that. What I would say is I do disagree that, that it's a conspiracy theory. What initial critical race theory was based on the premise. And the premise actually isn't bad, because critical race theory is actually the understanding that a lot of the laws, the legislation and the institutes did have racism permeating in it. So we can't say that it's completely incorrect, but how it's taught is extremely incorrect, and that's my issue with it. My issue isn't actually the fundamentals of critical race theory, because if we look at historically, why was there a need for the Race Relations Act? Because you could discriminate people in public places, in the workplace, on the basis of their skin colour. So we have to be careful to say it's completely, fictitious and those things, that they didn't exist, because that's not true either.
No, we don't, because we can say that critical race theory comes from critical theories, and the whole purpose of critical theories is neo-Marxism to undermine Western society, and we can show that. And we can show that we also have equality under the law in this country, and there is no oppression or suppression of certain demographics, and if there was, there'd be court cases about it. So we can say that critical race theory is peddling dangerous, divisive and toxic ideology, can we not, Mark?
Are you saying there isn't racism, though?
Who said there isn't racism? I don't think
nobody's saying that. Nobody is saying that. No. But when you are making very specific and serious allegations concerning the exercise of racial or other forms of discrimination, you have to be able to back that up with real hard empirical evidence. Clearly, apartheid South Africa had a whole series of laws that discriminated against people who were of certain ethnicities. Critical race theory is being peddled by the sort of ideological equivalent of snake oil salesmen and women, like Robin DiAngelo, who are making sweeping revolutionary claims that societies such as Britain and the United States of America today and other Western countries are structurally racist, as if they were just like apartheid South Africa, and that is clearly nonsense.
I think we're still experiencing the residual effects,
Thank you, Limmy. I'll ask the questions. Okay. Can I ask you, do the educational elites want people to hate their own country? Limmy.
Yes, I sincerely believe they do, and that is clear. For example, the police are going to subject all their employees to a form of critical race theory. Why on earth are they doing this? Yes, of course, they should be rooting out those specific individual policemen and women who practice racial discrimination. But why are they using taxpayers' money to propagandize what is essentially a revolutionary anti-liberal ideology? It's the same with the Tavistock Clinic in terms of their courses relating to psychotherapy. Every dimension of the public sector, local councils are doing this. And some of them are even doing it with really young children. If you look at the Green Labour Coalition in Brighton, they have been telling their teachers that they must instruct their pupils that Martin Luther King's belief that we should judge people on the basis of their individual characters, that is itself a form of racism. I mean, this is
No, I agree.
Why are we being forced to pay for it?
I agree fundamentally it should not be taught as factual. That's my issue. However, for us to completely dispel, again, I agree with Calvin when he says the laws in Britain, they are for everyone. My issue is the application of the law, and there are multiple reports to show that people from certain ethnic backgrounds are treated differently than, let's say, other backgrounds, and that's where I have an issue. Yes, in an ideal world, the law would be applicable to everyone and everyone would be treated fairly, but that's not the case. So we're dealing with residual effects of the past where people from black and ethnic minorities, Asian minorities, we can see even in recent reports when it comes to black men and Bangladeshi men, even though the majority of ethnic minorities are overqualified for various positions, the promotions in the workplace just isn't happening.
But the problem is,
why is that then? Why is that?
It's so difficult to have a conversation like this when you're conflating so many points. Are you asking a question about crime rates, or are you asking a question about employment? What is the question you want to get to? We have to really pin this down, because when you just conflate these things, you make it sound like the country is institutionally racist, which we know is not the case. So what I want to ask you is, how should we be addressing this topic of history in schools? You say we shouldn't be teaching critical race theory, but you seem to be arguing in favour of it as a broad perspective. So how should we be addressing this?
My issue is we shouldn't be teaching critical race theory as a fact. However, what I don't want to see is us brushing under the carpet. There are still issues in Britain with people from certain ethnic backgrounds when it comes to employment, when it comes to policing, and when it does come to some of the institutions. Again, I'm not going to say it's a completely institutionally racist country. However, we have to look at the facts and the reports that are there. For example, name bias, it's a real thing. If you have an ethnic name on an application form, it is harder for you to oftentimes get a job. These are facts. So I'm worried that if we completely dispel any conversation around race and just say, you know, the law says that everyone should be treated fairly, which it does, it's my application. The law is not being applied equally. However, going back to critical race theory, I do not believe it should be taught in schools as a fact, because we don't teach communism as a fact. We don't teach socialism as a fact. We don't even teach Christianity to be the truth anymore, and this is a Christian country.
For shame. Just to wrap up, one final question for you, Mark. How can we combat education being dominated by these terrible, toxic, divisive views?
Well, the politicians in the current government need to step up to the plate. I mean, this is happening within the public sector institutions under their watch. I mean, what are Suella Braverman and the other ministers actually doing? They're tolerating this. What are Conservative-led councils doing? Because this is also happening under their watch. So, of course, you would expect, you know, the Green Party in Brighton to be using taxpayers' money in this way outrageously. But why is it that centre-right politicians are allowing this to happen? So there's got to be an element of top-down change, but also philosophically, those of us who believe in the principles of a broadly liberal society need to start fighting this ideology and calling it out for what it is. It's a new form of proto-fascistic authoritarianism, and it's totally contrary to all the principles of Western civilization.
Thank you very much. That's Mark Ledning, Head of Cultural Affairs at the Institute of Economic Affairs, and Lynn May, political and social commentator. The London Fire Brigade's commissioner has accepted the organisation is institutionally racist and misogynistic. A report revealed accounts from a black firefighter who had a noose placed by his locker, women being groped and people having their helmets filled with urine. The review was commissioned after a trainee firefighter took his own life in 2020. More than 2,000 current and former staff and community groups spoke out, reporting sexist, racist and homophobic behaviour, plus leadership issues. Staff are afraid to speak out about abuse and unacceptable behaviour towards members of the public. GB News national reporter Theo Chikomba is there for us now.
Yes, that's right. Nazir Afzal, the former chief crown prosecutor in the Northwest, alongside 7 other professionals, the team of 8 spent the 10-month period looking into the culture here at the London Fire Brigade. And as you mentioned, they said that the brigade itself is misogynistic and racist. Now, it highlights accounts of so many different people from across the brigade, many of them citing some of the experiences that they've had. Now, just to give you another example, aside from the one you mentioned just a few moments ago, a Muslim man who was constantly bullied about his religion. He had bacon and sausages put in his coat pocket and a terrorist hotline sign posted in his locker. Now, in response to this, the Commissioner of the Fire Brigade, Andy Rowe, has accepted this, and he said from today it will be completely clear to all staff what behaviour isn't acceptable and what the consequences will be. Now, in terms of leadership itself, the managers, some of them are saying we need more teeth. They know there are some people who are causing problems, not using their positions correctly when they are at work, but they simply don't have enough power to make a change immediately. And just finally, Nazir Afzal spoke earlier today. He was saying if we're having accounts like this from staff saying they're not safe, then neither are we.
Thank you very much there. That was GB News national reporter Theo Chikombo. London Fire Commissioner Andy Rowe has said, "Today is a very sobering day. There is no place for discrimination, harassment and bullying in the brigade. And from today, it will be completely clear to all staff what behaviour isn't acceptable and what consequences will be." Now, the high-level fashion brand Balenciaga has been caught in a row after a photographer they hired to promote their new products released an advertising campaign featuring children holding explicit teddy bears dressed in bondage gear. The appearance of children displaying the scantily clad bears has been met with a flurry of outrage on social media directed towards the brand, with many accusing the fashion house of child abuse and encouraging others to cancel Balenciaga. Joining me now is Ollie London, social media commentator. Ollie, you've been on top of this case. Can you just give us a brief rundown of what actually has taken place?
So last week, Balenciaga featured this campaign on their website as part of their Christmas campaign, which was actually targeting children. They're trying to market these teddy bears to children. The teddy bears were covered in bondage, BDSM gear. They had these padlocks around their neck, very kind of sick stuff. That was not the only thing, though. If you zoom in closer to the pictures, there's actually so many details there. There's dates written on the wall. When you Google the top news stories of those days, it's referencing child predator court cases. There's also books and court documents being featured. There was a Supreme Court document featured under a handbag, which was referencing a Supreme Court case arguing for child porn to be legalised. So it's really, really shocking stuff. And then Balenciaga issued a statement apologising, which really isn't enough. They were trying to blame the creative studio behind this shoot. But really, you know, for these pictures to be on the Balenciaga website, it's a multi-billion-dollar company, has to be approved by the designer, the CEO, everyone at the top. So it's really shocking stuff.
And the photographer himself has come out to say, actually, I didn't get to select the products or the models. So Balenciaga know that their bondage teddy bear with black eyes and, as you say, bondage gear is going to be modelled by young, very, very young children. They knew that, regardless of what direction the photographer took.
You know, they're trying to blame the kind of creative agency. But, you know, the photographer is obviously just hired to take the photos. But this photographer does specialise in kind of very unusual and weird pictures of children. I've seen pictures of kids on his Instagram page and they've got toy guns surrounding them and stuff. Very kind of weird stuff. So it's not right. But, yeah, Balenciaga's blaming the creative agency. They're now threatening them with a $25 million lawsuit. But really the buck stops with Balenciaga. After they deleted all these child pictures, they apologised. They then posted more things online. There was a man holding a handbag. Behind them, there was a certificate on the wall. If you zoom into the name, you Google the name, it's actually a child predator that had a very big court case. So there's so many references to really shocking and dark stuff. And, you know, you can't find all the results on Google, but if you go on Twitter and do some research, there's some kind of very kind of satanic and sick references in these pictures.
Absolutely. I looked myself. I saw the paperwork on the desk. There was a Supreme Court case about child pornography online. I saw that Balenciaga have also wiped their social media accounts, which yells to me, you know, potential guilt. However, one of the photo shoots was also an abused, a physically abused person, as in the person had black eyes and bruises and a Balenciaga hoodie and a Balenciaga teddy bear. It seems to me there's a very dark, evil undertone going behind this brand. Is is this a manifestation of what's going on in the industry as a whole?
Well, firstly, Balenciaga, as a marketing tactic, they do wipe their Instagram quite often. It's one of their marketing and PR stunts. But yeah, there was also a picture of a woman with black eyes and clearly looked like they'd been abused and assaulted. That was the theme. They were trying to glorify that and glamorise it and trying to normalise it, just like the kids holding the bondage teddy bears. So I definitely think Balenciaga has very dark kind of things going on. And in 2016, one of the people that recruited all of the models for Balenciaga's runway show was a woman called Rachel Chandler, who has been on Jeffrey Epstein's island. She's even posted a picture on Instagram of CCTV footage back in 2013, bragging about being on the island. And if you look at her modelling agency, every single one of the models looks like a trafficking victim. You can see they've got very dark under the eyes, so people need to research that. But I think it's, you know, it's definitely the industry as a whole, because why isn't Kim Kardashian, who is the public face of this brand, why has she stayed silent? She's got 4 children. Why has she said nothing? You know, Balenciaga quickly dropped Kanye for his tweets, and rightly so, because what he said was absolutely shocking. But why has Kim Kardashian stayed absolutely silent on this? She's the public face. She's getting paid millions of dollars to promote this brand. Why is she saying nothing for these kids?
That's a good question. I would wrap up by asking you, Ollie, which celebrities have come out and denounced Balenciaga?
Well, actually, you know, good luck finding a celebrity to denounce this, because, as you know, in Hollywood, the liberal elite, you know, they don't like to talk about these things. You know, they think it's, you know, not something to talk about. They don't want to get cancelled. They don't want to get in the drama. So there's actually very few celebrities. Obviously, you have conservative people like Candace Owens has spoken out about it, yes, but very few Hollywood celebrities are speaking about this. You know, Nicole Kidman is also a brand ambassador for the brand. Elizabeth Hubert, the French actress, you know, they're all staying silent, which, you know, says a lot.
Terrible. I'd love to see some of them speak out. Thank you very much, Ollie London, for that. Now, Balenciaga has issued a statement in regard to the controversy, stating, "We sincerely apologise for any offence our holiday campaign may have caused. Our plush bear bags should not have been featured with children in this campaign. We have immediately removed the campaign from all platforms. We stand for children's safety and well-being." Lots of you have been getting in touch today about the topics we've discussed. Guy on a Starmer government says, "It is not in a Labour government's makeup to cut taxes." End of. Taxes will go up for everyone, and at income tax and local tax levels. VAT will also go up, mark my words. Guy, I tend to agree with you. They may talk the good talk, but when have we ever known the Labour Party to cut taxes? Dan on Labour's chances in the Red Wall says, "Starmer has no chance of winning my Red Wall vote. He's a total woke hypocrite who can't be trusted. Starmer would have the UK back in the EU in another name. The Conservatives have 2 years to turn the tide, or God knows where our country will be headed." Well, by then, Dan, the current Conservative government might have taken us back into the EU the way things are looking, so who knows? Simon on the Scientific Advisor email relations says, "If all this about violence is true, should we trust the science on net zero? Isn't that political as well?" Yes, you're asking the right questions, Simon. That's what I like to see. More people need to ask this question. Scientific consensus is not the way forward. Let's debate. Let's have a conversation about these things. Derek on critical race theory says, "I'm so fed up of the critical race theory being imported from our cousins across the pond. Colour just happens to be where your genes come from. Every kid in this country needs to be taught reading, writing and arithmetic. When all schools get this sorted, maybe the kids will be able to read about our history and get the facts right about the UK." Spot on. More reading, writing and arithmetic, less critical race theory, less wokeness in our schools, please. You have been watching Real Britain with me, Calvin Robinson. Thank you very much for your company today. Coming up is Nana Okoye's show with Dawn Neeson, my old panellist. But for now, I'll leave you with the weather. God bless.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking very unsettled as outbreaks of rain and brisk winds move eastwards. Let's take a look at the details. A wet evening to come across southwest England. The rain moving east will be heavy at times, which could lead to some localised flooding. Windy too, with gales around the coasts. Cloudy skies across southeast England with outbreaks of rain moving in from the west. The rain could turn heavy at times, especially later. Heavy rain is expected across southern Wales this evening, leading to the risk of flooding. Strong southerly winds continuing, but on the mild side. A cloudy evening across the Midlands with an increasing risk of rain, the wind also picking up for many. Mild for the time of year with temperatures generally still in double figures. A wet end to the day across northern England as heavy bursts of rain continue to move in from the west. Winds picking up, these brisk over the hills.